The very first election for 2022 that we'll be looking at on this channel is not a nationwide election, nor is it an election in a major urban area like Tokyo or Osaka. It's an election for a regional city in one of Japan's smallest prefectures, but the ruling bloc's victory here on Sunday may play a key role in deciding the course for politics in the country for 2022. Today we're looking at the Nago mayoral election. Nago is a city in Okinawa Prefecture, which is part of the Ryukyu Island chain between western Japan and Taiwan. It is in the northern part of the main island and is the 6th largest city in the prefecture, which itself is 25th most populated in Japan's 47 prefectures, so it's not a big city. Despite its small size and distance from major urban areas on mainland Japan, it plays a key role in Japanese politics because the Okinawa prefectural government and the central government are at odds over a planned construction of a U.S. military base in the city. To understand this issue, we need to look at Japan's relationship with the U.S. from a national defense perspective. After Japan surrendered to the U.S.-led Allied forces in World War II, it forfeited its military in exchange for having the U.S. defend the country if it ever came under attack. This was convenient for Washington because it gave them a foothold in the Asia-Pacific. This agreement also meant that the U.S. stationed many armed forces personnel in Japan, and Okinawa's geographical advantage as an island area close to other political hotspots like Taiwan and the Korean Peninsula made it an ideal location for U.S. military bases. As a result, Okinawa came to be home to 70% of all U.S. bases in Japan, despite only making up 0.6% of its landmass. On a quick side note, Okinawa was under U.S. rule even after Japan gained independence after the Second World War, and only became part of Japan again in 1972. The Okinawa prefectural government, led by Governor Denny Tamaki, believes that the U.S.-Japan agreement puts too heavy of a burden on the prefecture and would like to see the U.S. military presence reduced and at least partially removed elsewhere in Japan. It's amid such tension between the prefectural and the central government that the Nago election took place. Now let's look at the election itself. The mayoral election on January 23rd was basically a one-on-one match between a candidate supported by the central government and another supported by the prefectural government. The former was incumbent Mayor Taketoyo Toguchi, who is backed by the LDP of Prime Minister Fumio Kishida and his junior coalition partner Komeito. The 60-year-old sought a second term after he was first elected mayor in 2018. The latter was Yohei Kishimoto, a member of the city assembly. The challenger was backed by what is known as the All Okinawa Coalition, which is a group of political forces across the political spectrum which wants to reduce the U.S. presence in Okinawa. Tamaki hails from this camp and was elected governor in 2018. The national opposition parties like the CDP and the JCP also support the 49-year-old Kishimoto. One of the major issues debated in the election was whether to continue the construction of a U.S. military base in the city. The central government wants to build a new U.S. base in the Henoko coastal district in the city, while the prefectural government opposes it. The central government believes that the base should be built to relocate the U.S. Marine Corps Air Station Futenma, which is currently in a heavily populated area in Ginowan, Okinawa. Meanwhile, the opponents are skeptical as to whether the new base will lead to Futenma being vacated and are worried about the destruction of the marine ecosystem in Henoko. While the city of Nago doesn't have the final say in whether the construction project should go on or not, the result of the election will be a show of how local residents feel about it. Kishimoto, the All Okinawa candidate, was against the project and made the issue a key aspect of his campaign. Meanwhile, Toguchi avoided taking a position on the matter, saying that he will wait and see how court battles between the Okinawan and central governments will play out. Toguchi instead preferred to focus more on bread-and-butter issues, such as using government grants to boost the local economy. Another key issue in the debate was, unsurprisingly, COVID, but the way it became involved in the Nago race was rather unique. Let's go back to the defense agreement between Japan and the United States. Having U.S. forces in Japan means that there obviously needs to be an agreement on the legal statuses of American military members in Japan. And in the existing Status of Forces Agreement, the U.S. military is responsible for border measures for deployed personnel landing directly in U.S. bases, including quarantine measures. While Japan has one of the world's strictest quarantine measures against COVID, including a ban on most foreigners, the US side was not as enthusiastic in their COVID measures. It was revealed that the military was not testing personnel for the virus before departure from the US and immediately after arrival in Japan, and allowed people to move freely within the bases during the post-arrival self-isolation period. This led to a coronavirus outbreak in US bases in Japan, especially in places like Camp Hansen, located in Nago. Because locals work in the bases as well, this soon led to a surge in infections among the general public, with regions hosting bases such as Okinawa and around Air Station Iwakuni in western Japan, especially suffering from the uptick in infections. This led to increased anti-US based sentiment around the country, and the Japanese opposition bloc called on the government to demand a revision to the Status of Forces Agreement that allowed for the spread of the coronavirus. The All Okinawa camp sought to tie the issue of COVID spreading from US bases to the Henoko base issue, which had significant effect. But the incumbent side hit back, saying that the spread of COVID in the prefecture was not the fault of the US military, but of Governor Tamaki's failed coronavirus policies. So how did the election play out? Toguchi, the incumbent, claimed a solid victory over Kishimoto, being ahead by 15 percentage points. Let's look at the results more closely. The first thing to note is that voter turnout was at 68.32%. This looks relatively high at first, but the average turnout for past Nago mayoral races is in the high 70s, and the last race in 2018 had a turnout of around 77%, so we see that turnout dropped by around 10% this year. As with any election, lower turnout usually means that people who are not affiliated to any party and are not highly invested in politics stayed home. Now let's look at the results themselves. Toguchi's 15-point lead is surprising given the fact that public surveys taken by local and national media outlets in the week prior showed the two candidates neck and neck, or with Kishimoto trailing very closely behind. Instead of what had been suggested, the actual results more closely mirrored the outcome of Japan's general election last October. In Nago, which is the part of the Okinawa No. 3 district, the central government-backed Aiko Shimajiri won against opposition-backed Tomohiro Yara by over 5 points. Exit polls showed that Toguchi led among early voters while Kishimoto had a slight lead for on-the-day voters, which, when combined with the low turnout, suggests that core ruling bloc supporters who had their minds made up came out in droves in early day voting, while undecided voters who didn't vote early stayed home. Exit polls also showed that younger generations tended to support Toguchi, while the older population backed Kishimoto. This is a recurring trend in Okinawa politics, where older populations see US military presence as a major voting issue, while younger generations prioritize economic issues. Now let's look at the ramifications of the election. The Nago mayor can't influence whether the new base plan in Henoko will proceed or be halted, but the election results may affect the people in power who can. This is because the Nago race was seen as a bellwether election for a string of races in Okinawa, culminating in the gubernatorial race. Denny Tamaki, the governor butting heads with Tokyo over the base plan, is up for re-election in September, and a loss for the All Okinawa camp spells trouble for his ability to fend off challenges. It is also a bellwether election for the country as a whole, as it was the first race with nationwide attention that pitted the ruling bloc against the opposition bloc after the opposition's drubbing in the 2021 general election, and the subsequent change in leadership for the biggest opposition party, the CDP. The perceived weakness of the opposition bloc, even in places like Okinawa, an environment that is favorable to the opposition compared to the national average, leaves a sting that may affect the regional elections as well as the upcoming national upper house election in July. That's it for this video. Thanks for watching and please subscribe.